The categories will be movement, level design, and combat. Let's start with round 1, movement. Retro Doom has some of the most fluid movement in the shooter scene. It's almost mandatory to play with always run on, so every single second of traversal has a breakneck pace. It takes full advantage of the minimalist design of its arenas, offering wide open spaces for strafing around opponents. What's more is, since Retro Doom has almost no defensive options, the only way you can avoid taking damage is to run out of the way in time, and this is where the fluidity of the movement really shines. More often than not, briskly dodging projectiles whilst keeping your crosshairs locked on the enemy is a simple task. This is thanks in part to the game's lock-on feature, but the 2D adjacent graphics and lack of camera control help alleviate the constant nuisance of having to readjust your aim. While we'll get to level design a bit later, Retro Doom's movement only succeeds because of the lack of obstacles during battle, allowing for a simple but speedy movement system that does what it needs to and so much more. In contrast, modern Doom uses verticality much more, with Eternal taking place almost solely in the air at points. This added dimension of movement should theoretically compromise the intense speed of the classic style, but if anything, modern Doom is faster. Now, it may only feel this way due to all the added bells and whistles, and the speed at which you switch weapons and playstyles, but zipping around an arena on foot feels indistinguishable from how it did in the original games, with the added bonus of a freaking shotgun grappling hook letting you soar around the more fleshed out areas. And it's safe to say that Modern Doom is nothing but a straight upgrade. Round 1 goes to Modern Doom. Next is level design. Like I said earlier, classic Doom's humongous open arenas allow for the blistering pace that carved out this franchise's spot in history, and it really allows you to appreciate the full majesty and scale that the graphics simply can't represent. But this doesn't mean that Retro Doom is just boring wide open spaces. Almost every level has some sort of gimmick to its design that makes it stand out from the rest of the game, as well as incorporating a nauseous amount of depth when you need to navigate this labyrinth for the keys to progress. Though some levels have unintuitive solutions to those puzzles, and I shudder to imagine playing these games without the modern improvements like a map, Retro Doom requires a deeper understanding of your surroundings to succeed, and it's much easier to appreciate its bare-bones level design after so many shooters feel cluttered with obstacles. However, it's worth mentioning that Doom 2 has perhaps one of the most baffling levels in the history of the franchise, the Chasm. This level is a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes Doom such an iconic shooter, featuring narrow pathways and requiring pinpoint movement. I assume it's some kind of troll level, but it comes across as the work of an amateurish modder. Meanwhile, Modern Doom's level design is much more linear and scripted. On the plus side, that means it's hard to get lost, but on the downside, the game begins to feel samey, as you kill a wave of enemies, walk down a corridor, rinse and repeat. While the games certainly have more variety in their art style, they lack the creativity of classic Doom levels. They never shock with a level that feels completely different to all the rest. Also, the atrocious platforming sections in Doom Eternal seal the deal. This round goes to classic Doom. Finally, combat. Retro Doom gives you two options, run and shoot. That's it. No timing your reloads, no hiding behind cover. This is distilled run and gunning with no interruptions. I would say it trims the fat off all the combat, but it never had any to begin with. These bare-bones options make the combat feel almost primal, like you're a beast with nothing but 2 legs and a mountain of lead, and by the icon of sin does it work. The pure satisfaction of eviscerating your enemies as you blitz around them, firing an uninterrupted stream of bullets, is a magic most FPS games of today could only hope to emulate. But Retro Doom does it so effortlessly that it feels like the purest form of an FPS, which it technically is. But Modern Doom adds dozens of mechanics to combat that, depending on your opinion, can either enhance or dilute the FPS experience. The biggest change is the resource management and combat chess style of gameplay these titles adopted. It's almost like balancing your cooldowns in a MOBA, as you calculate when the right time to use your chainsaw, flamethrower, and glory kill is, as you precariously balance your supplies against the unceasing hordes of the unholy. Modern Doom is by no means a game where you can just turn off your brain and charge barrel first into combat. It requires more tactical decision making than Retro Doom ever did, and one isn't necessarily better than the other in this case. It just comes down to preference. Do you prefer simpler and purer gameplay loops that do one thing nearly perfectly, or do you like more in-depth and thoughtful gameplay that demands constant engagement to perfect? This is why I don't feel comfortable declaring either version of Doom superior, because their combat isn't comparable like their movement and level design. They're two entirely different beasts. It's like comparing Final Fantasy VII combat to Final Fantasy VII Remake combat. While they both have the same gameplay at their essence, they're still too different to draw a parallel to. For the sake of completionism, I'm going to declare that I prefer Modern Doom's more thoughtful combat, but that doesn't invalidate Retro Doom's distilled style of gunplay. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, here's a video on if Doom has the right idea about mining hell for resources.